I could listen to that volunteer talk all day. I don't know if that little piano track matches the weather today or yesterday, but the Made for More conversation that we've been in week 4. So if you're joining us for the first time today, this is the 4th week of just exploring what it looks like to consider that we are really two words that are so important and one word that connects it. We're made. We have this intention and this purpose outside of ourselves, something that God puts within us or upon us, and we're made for more. So there's a bit of an assumption there that there's less that's possible. So we're made for more, and we're going to jump into week 4. We're going to explore that, take a look at how that might unfold for us. I hope it brings you some encouragement as we walk through this morning, and we talk about the general idea that we laid out in week 1. And I'll let you look at this real quick. I admittedly, the whole series, I'm not jazzed up about this slide and all these phrases, but they just say what needs to be said. The first is this: everyone is a gift. Week 1, we said everyone is a gift. And what that's not like a Hallmark greeting card or the plot line for a Hallmark movie. It is those, but it's also this reality that's saying, did you know every single one of you, regardless of how much you feel like you're thriving or how much you feel like you're struggling, everyone in this room, everyone in your community, everyone you'll encounter, they are a gift, and not because of what they produce, not because of what they contribute, not because of what they can give, but simply because they are made by a loving Father, a heavenly Father, in His image. The dramatic language that Scripture uses to say that we are not just biology and chemistry governed by the laws of physics, but that we are carrying within us the very image of God. That's heavy stuff right there. Made means everyone is a gift. And then everyone is a gift with gifts. So it's not just to be like, hey, you're a 10. It's more like, okay, so you're incredible, but why are you incredible? Well, because you have something. And what you're supposed to do with that something. Your life will have the most purpose and the most meaning when what you do with that something is you share it. And so that's kind of been the plot line we've walked. And today we're going to talk about community and what really drove us to how gifts should be shared in community. What drove me, and sometimes you have those moments, I think the classic word is serendipity. It just means everything lines up. This week, an article arrived in my inbox, Surgeon General updating, and the article was this: our epidemic of loneliness and isolation is killing us. Just look at that headline real quick. This is what the Surgeon General goes on to say. Loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both individual and social health. It's associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. I don't know how they do that math or how they work that out, but I know that that's not good for you. Loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and even greater than the mortality rate associated with obesity and physical inactivity. Loneliness increases the risk of premature death by nearly 30%. And this just hit me. I'm like, we've been sitting for a few years like this. We got tired of this word, right? Epidemic, sitting in, and all of a sudden something pops out that we kind of intuitively know, loneliness is killing us. And it doesn't have to be that way. It's not like all of human history, people have just been lonely. We're in a unique era, and what's the ethos of that era is this sense of disconnection. So my guess is that if you're here today, because the report cited that 1/2 of all U.S. adults feel lonely. And here in this room, you might be lonely even though you're surrounded by people. So I want to gently and carefully look at a hope-filled encouragement about our gifts and sharing our gifts, kind of in the face of that we as a people might be particularly lonely. We might be feeling that even though we're as connected as ever. The report goes on to say, we know that loneliness is a common feeling that many people experience. It's like hunger or thirst. It's a feeling the body sends us when something we need for survival is missing. So then I thought about, okay, local loneliness. So this church is in Southeast Boise. Some of you come across from the valley, but this is what I know. I shared this a few months ago. This is Surprise Valley. The church is located right in here. Here's Harris Ranch and Columbia Village. And this is data on just the neighbors here in Surprise Valley who feel down, depressed, or hopeless. Self-identified, 25.7% of the Surprise Valley community feels down, depressed, or hopeless. Now, you drive the street when the leaves are all coming out, you're like, no, this is the happiest place on the planet. But in the lives of those of us on that planet, there's loneliness. So let's just today kind of put both feet firmly facing forward and say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to consider that this isn't the way things have to be. And in our spaces, when we leave this church experience, might be the only time you're here, right? But wherever you go, maybe we can fight this and make a difference. And maybe the solution to this is more intuitive, and it's something that God has been working within us from the beginning, and we can lean into that. And we can tackle that. So I want to give you a question, though. We do a few questions on a morning. This is a chance for you to turn. If you came with someone, talk with them. But I have a rule. Because the topic's loneliness, and if someone's sitting alone, which is not the same as being lonely, if someone's sitting alone, turn to them real quick and go, hey, do you want to join our conversation? If they say no, they're clearly not interested in talking to you. So you turn back to where you are. But maybe they'll go, thank you. Because, man, when the whole room lights up in conversation, it's so like isolating. Just sit here and count the seconds and wait. Okay, so here's your question. It's this right here. What advice would you give a friend who's struggling with feeling lonely? This could be you right now that needs this advice. And if you don't feel isolated and lonely, I feel like I can almost say, I guarantee you, you know somebody who is. And maybe they haven't admitted it, and maybe you don't see it, but it's there. So what advice would you give a friend who's struggling with feeling lonely? Go ahead and turn, grab someone, start a conversation. You get about a minute to just chat about this. We'll be back in a minute. All right, take about 10 seconds. Now, I've heard that can be such an uncomfortable part of the morning. For some of you, others of you can't wait. You're like, I want to talk to somebody. But just hearing the rumble of conversation. Now, being connected and having conversation doesn't automatically eliminate isolation and loneliness. You can be very alone, and you can be surrounded by people who love you. With that reality, though, I think we need to be talking more. We need to be sharing what we're doing and how we're fighting back against these things that are causing such negative impacts on us. And I would just encourage you, if you don't hear anything else about what we're going to jump into today, if everything else just doesn't connect, if you're lonely, just tell somebody. Just find somebody and say, hey, I was at that thing today and the guy said that and I read the Surgeon General's report and that's me. I'm smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's not good for me. It's not, that's the thing. The issue is not like smoking. It's like, it's not good for you. It's not healthy for you. Neither is being alone. So we're going to look at, what's the remedy to this? Because I'm certainly not like a guy who knows how to fix community loneliness. But we're going to jump into the scriptures, and we're going to start with a letter, just a portion of a letter that Paul, known in the Christian history as the Apostle Paul, he's one of the leaders of the movement of Christianity. And and I love reminding us of this story. Paul was a deeply Jewish man, highly educated, very devout. and very passionate. And so as Jesus followers began to emerge following the death and the resurrection of Jesus, as a devout Jewish man, Paul set out with a passion to stamp that out. And he was there, the very first martyrdom or execution we see in the Bible, in the book of Acts. It's this man named Stephen. And we see Paul is on the sidelines, and he's saying, you're doing the right thing, as they kill Stephen publicly. Paul's celebrating that. Eventually, he ends up with a letter in his pocket from the Roman authorities that says, you go around, you snuff out anybody, or you sniff out anybody who's following the way of Jesus, you arrest them, you drag them away, let's shut this thing down. It's like a virus. And Paul's on his way to do that, and in just a few short sentences, we discover, it says, essentially, Jesus appears to him. You can read these sentences in like 8 seconds, but there's so much more that must have happened. He had an encounter with the resurrected Jesus, and Jesus lovingly drew Paul in and said, your devotion is right, but its direction is wrong. I'm who you're looking for. And Paul's transformed, but he's also blinded. He has this physical outcome. And he ends up, the Bible tells us, in Judah's house on Straight Street. Gives us the location of it. He's in the basement of Judah's house. He's blind. And God tells this man named Ananias, he says, I need you to go. The enemy of the people following Jesus, named Paul, he's in this basement. I want you to go pray for him, and he's going to see again. That's just a wild story if you think about it. Like, your oppressor is blinded in your basement, and you get a one-on-one with him. All right? You know how that's normally going to go. And Ananias listens and he prays, and Paul sees again, and he's welcomed. Once an enemy, once a persecutor, once full of hate toward, he now becomes family. And that's the way God is always building his church. He's taking people who should be pushed out from each other. He's going, we're not going to do it that way. And here's what's really interesting. In the midst of that, he's going to give us a model for how to fight isolation and how to live out our gifts, regardless of your age, your education, your success. Doesn't matter, okay? So here's Paul now. Years later, he's writing this letter to a group of people following Jesus in the city of Corinth. And this is what he says. He says, just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body. Now, as we read and go through these slides, you're going to find he just keeps repeating himself. But sometimes, moms and dads know this. You repeat yourself when you're trying to get something through and it doesn't seem to be sticking. You say it over and over. You say it a dozen different ways. The one thing Paul doesn't do is just go towards like, I'm bigger than you, so you're going to listen thing. He just keeps going through it, repeating it. So just as a body, though one has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit, so as to form one body, whether Jew or Gentile, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. And this is an important introduction because Paul's not just saying, everybody's a body. He's saying, I have encountered Jesus and I've been drawn into the church, and everybody belongs, and I wish everybody would see, and everybody would be drawn in to see this is where they fit. He's not trying to make an isolated group of people. He's trying to invite everybody in to experience. So it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit as to form one body. And then he continues. And he says, even so, the body's not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not, for that reason, stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body. You see what he's doing? He's starting to go through. He's starting to kind of, in a way that's detached, say to people, you're thinking wrongly about yourself. You keep thinking, I'm not that, so I'm isolated, I don't belong, I don't fit, I'm not sure where I fit. And he's going, no, actually, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. It's still the eye. And what Paul wants to do is turn the lenses and turn everything into focus. So the eye begins to see that it's not just an eye, it's the eye. It's part of this. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed these parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. And if they were all one part, where would the body be? Now he continues, as it is, there are many parts but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. The head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. Starting to see what Paul's getting at? He's starting to say, look, there's a picture unfolding here, and it's different than anything else you'll encounter. It's not unlike other systems, other organizations, or other communities that form. In this system, you're going to find that every single part is going to go all the way to the parts that seem like they don't matter. They're some of the ones that matter the most. The head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unrepresentable are treated with special modesty. Let's just talk about that real quick. Like look at this picture, look at this pitch, look at this closing argument. Did you know that every part of the body matters? No part is isolated, no part is left out, no part is unimportant. This body's drawn together by the goodness of Jesus Christ. All are invited to receive that goodness and be part of this body. There's nobody who in this body doesn't matter for the health and the function of this. Sounds like I'm saying the same thing over and over, right? That's what Paul's doing. He's just driving it home. But he turns a corner here. I mean, just look at this language. Those parts of the body that seem weak, they're so important. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we're going to treat those with special honor. And the parts that are unrepresentable, well, they're going to be treated with special modesty. So I think about my gifts, right? I'm not a musician. I'm not a singer. I'm not handy. Well, I've gotten better, but I've shared this before. One time I tried to step up to the plate and be handy in my house. We had a faucet that was leaking one drip every minute. By the time I was done, we were on the phone with a plumber. Can you get out here? I've destroyed all the plumbing in the bathroom, right? So that hasn't necessarily been my thing. I'm a pastor. It's one of the areas I think I'm gifted. I love sharing the hope of Christ with people. And I realize one thing is I love the church. I love the church I serve. I love this church. Then I stop and I'm like, well, 99% of you, okay? I love most of the church, but then and as I start to think about it, I go, but come on, the body, there are some parts, right? What's it for? The appendix? What's that do but keep healthcare going by bursting every now and then? You got to go in and get it. What's the appendix do? And I start to think about it, and Paul's going, here's the deal. Every part matters. What he doesn't know is extensive research is going to be done to verify this, and we discover that when this little book here, everyone has a but. Okay, so this is Paul's using this vague language, but this is what he means. There's parts of the body you don't show when you're out in public. There's parts of the body that their purpose, it's not kind of thing that gets everyone excited, but you have to use that purpose once or twice a day, yet generally, that's kind of where Paul's going. Everyone has a but. Some of you are the but. That's, I guess, kind of what we're getting at here. And you've got to love the but, right? Because the but serves a very important purpose. All right. Thanks for walking down that road with me. I always like to verify everything I say with good data. So he continues. He says, while our presentable parts need no special treatment, but God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it. So there should be no division in the body, but its parts should have equal concern for each other. It's interesting to think about how Jesus talked about what his followers would be like. At one point, he said to his followers, here's how people are going to know that the things I taught, the things I said would happen, the things I did are real. They're going to know by your love for one another. That's going to be their indicator. It's not going to be the miracles you perform, the yards that you rake for the neighborhood, the money you give, the how large of a building you build, your band. It's like, no, you're going to be known by your love for one another. And he goes as far as to say, if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. And if one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Really sounds like a family, doesn't it? Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. If one part of the body is lonely, every part should know that they're also lonely, because that part shouldn't be lonely. And if one part of the body is celebrating, every part should be able to rejoice with it, not say, you don't get to rejoice because my life is full of pain, so we're not going to do that. We're lonely together and we celebrate together, right? That's the picture. You're the body of Christ. And I was thinking about this, and I'm just take a minute with this. Forgive this illustration, but I was doing some yard work this week, okay? This weekend, and by yard work, I mean I planted some vegetables. And I've got soft hands, so I wore gloves, okay? My wife doesn't wear gloves. She's super tough, but I need my gloves. I can't do anything without them. And this was the glove I used. But this is a little bit like Paul's saying, like the glove has all these parts. It's got fingers, a palm, it works together. You need this glove to get something done. Like this glove has a purpose. It has capacity. This glove is ready to plant my veggies. So that was way more dramatic than I wanted it to sound. So if I say, though, let's just practice this. If I say to this glove, okay, I got some coffee up here, a little bit left. If I say, glove, get me some coffee. Well, I just said this glove has purpose. It has capacity. This glove can grab a cup of coffee, I promise you. But what starts to unfold is you realize that this glove can't do anything. So maybe it needs some encouragement or some inspiration, right? You are the best glove I've ever seen. You are a glove with gifts and with gifts to share. You're a 10. You're a 10 right here. Maybe some gloves are a 10 somewhere else. You're a 10 right here. Will you grab me some coffee? Maybe it's a matter of training. It's not encouragement. It knows it's a glove. It just needs training. Glove, maybe you need to understand that this right here is the magic. That's the magic. You figure out how to use this with these guys, you're going to be able to do anything I want you to do. All you have to do is understand your purpose. I'm going to connect you with a few other gloves, a few other thumbs. They're going to tell you how this works. Glove, grab me some coffee. You see where this is going? This glove continues to have all the capacity, all the potential, all the purpose, and it's so ineffective at doing a very small task. Maybe the glove just needs more followers. It's got to figure, Mr. Beast figured out the algorithm. The glove just has to do the same thing. And all of a sudden, that's a shout out to my younger audience right now. And all it needs is to just get a greater sense of momentum happening behind it. Or maybe what it needs is to not be alone. So you give other gloves to it, and a real diversity of gloves. There's so many different types of gloves, mechanics gloves, garden gloves. All right, glove, get me a cup of coffee. Still stuck in the same place. You know what the problem is? I don't think that this glove is committed. I think it lost its way. It had some bad experiences as a glove, and it needs to rededicate itself to being a glove. And so you sit and you walk. Here's the thing, none of that works. There's only one thing that gives this glove what it needs, and it's a living hand. It's a living, so the power is not in the glove. And that's what Paul's saying. He's going, the body, the whole goal here is not some cool metaphor about a body. It's the power in that body. It's the Spirit of God. It's Jesus Christ working within all of us to transform us. So when we need to grab that cup of coffee, look how, that was magical, right? I had like 5 minutes, the glove didn't do a thing. And it delivered. Hold that in your mind. I know it's a little silly, but hold that in your mind, because that's the reality that Paul's driving home for you and I. He's saying it's not just enough to say you're all a glove. You all have purpose, and you all have potential, and you all have the capacity. He's at the heart of it saying, but you need Jesus to be, through the power of the Spirit, to be the living hand that moves the glove for its purpose, made for more. So I'm going to take us into a closing story to really explore right now. And the story I've selected, it's Paul again. It's in the book of Acts, which is the story of the church forming. It's so boring. And I did that on purpose because we're going to find this story almost feels like maybe our lives. We go to work on Monday, we're retired, we have school, we have practice. It's May, like the year's almost ending for our students, and parents are trying to figure out what the summer's going to look like. This is just Paul day-to-day life. And he's going to illustrate, I am the body of Christ. I have potential, I have capacity, I have purpose, but I also have power. Watch how simple and ordinary it looks. This isn't some story of like 20,000 people eating with a few loaves of bread and some fish. It's not a story of someone walking on water. It's not a story of Paul. At one point, there's a story that says Paul just touched somebody's clothing. They weren't even there. It was a piece of their clothing, and they were healed at a distance. What? That's wild. Well, let's go into a not so wild story and see how community and gifting come together. And hopefully, what we see underneath it is a way to fight loneliness. Acts chapter 18. Then Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. So some geography. There he became acquainted with a Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently arrived from Italy with his wife Priscilla. Really important people in the early church. We're not going to go into all their discussions, but one of the things that's so profound in this couple is this woman right here, Priscilla. In the very early church, there's this guy named Apollo, and he's really good at talking about God, but he's missing it. He's a really good orator, but he's missing some key things. And Priscilla sits him down with her husband, but the leader's Priscilla, and sets him straight. She tells him how he's off. She puts him on the right path. And then he goes out and he's been corrected and he's stepping out in the correct direction. So the order of things is real important. The next time we see them, it's her name first. So that's this couple, all right? That's what's going on here. But let's see kind of where they are. Athens, it's about 51 AD, so a while ago. Paul was just in Athens and he's talking about Jesus to some of the sharpest philosophical minds there are. They're debating every day in the public square. People are coming and listening. And so he's it's happening, right? And then he goes over to Corinth and he meets Priscilla and Aquila, and basically they share a room together, get some rent, and work. They had left Italy when Claudius Caesar deported all the Jews from Rome. Paul lived and worked with them, for they were tent makers, just as he was. Tent maker is not like a fancy word, like it means something dramatic. They worked on tents. They shared a room. They were following Jesus. Super profound outcome. We're made to share our gifts in community. Paul shows up, meets a few other people. They share common direction. They get together. They're tent makers. They're sharing their gifts in community, because last week we talked about hoarding, we talked about keeping, and we talked about stewarding. Hoarding your gifts comes from an emotional place of being connected to your gifts in a way that you're afraid if you put them out there, you might be rejected or someone might take them from you. And so you end up just keeping them because that feels like the safest way to live. And sometimes I hoard my gifts, and you do too. And keeping is when you take that step and you go, actually, I could make some money and build some network off these things. And so you keep them for yourself. Your main motivation is, how are my gifts used to benefit me? And then there's stewarding. So Paul's a tent maker. He could have been making bank, making tents. I don't know how much he got paid. But instead, he's using his tent making as a way to steward his gift to be part of community and share the hope of Christ. And steward was a word that just simply meant manage or curate. And at the heart of steward is this: you don't own your gifts. They're on loan. You're just supposed to put them out on display for people to enjoy them and to appreciate them. But when you start to think you own your gifts, it's a really important distinction in the Christian faith about where ownership lies. When you start to think you own your gifts, then you fall more easily into hoarding or keeping. But if you're stewarding, you put them out there, put them on display for people to enjoy them. An author I love, if you haven't read him and you like a good, encouraging author, this guy's great. Dee loves him. Bob Goff says this: God doesn't give us a recipe for living in community. He doesn't say, do this, then do that, then do this. But look what he gives us. He gives us great ingredients. He gives us everybody, always. He goes on to say, if we're going to get it right, it's going to take everybody to pull it off. It won't get done in a day or two either. It's going to take always. And I love the sentiment behind this, because this is the heart behind the movement of the church. This is the heart behind the movement that has brought hope to the world, that brought healthcare to the world, that brought public education to the world, that elevated the voice of women in the world. This was a movement that took everybody always. I think about Eastwind. Mary was right. I am a coffee snob, but the team that comes in week and week out and makes this experience happen. You might have just thought everyone just shows up, unlocks the door, like something happens. There's a lot of work that goes into it, right? And part of the reason all that work goes into it is because we love you. And we want you to experience, we love you because God, not on our own capacity. You're not like the group we love the most. We just love you because you're made in the image of God. And we care so deeply that you would have that encounter, that completeness, that foundation. Our mission is we want you to be inspired to follow Jesus and deepen your faith and relationship with him. So every week we're like, how can we inspire people to deepen their faith and relationship? How can that happen in this space? Well, there's so many people. There's about 150 kids here on a typical morning. There are so many people who love and serve those kids and point them to Jesus. Everybody, always. It's very ordinary. I mean, think about this. If I was you and I were hanging out and I'm like, I've got a dream job for you. You're not going to get paid. Oh, okay, but it's awesome. You're going to hang out with a bunch of kids, preschoolers, at 9 in the morning, get 9:30 in the morning, and 18 of them in a small room. How's that sound? right? That's not a great ask. So then this is what churches do. They go, well, you know what? Parents need to rotate. Their kids, they got to rotate through and watch them. And I'm like, are you serious right now? Well, that's how we treated music. Your music rotate through. All right? It would be, or what if that's how we treated those of you who don't love coffee, you're in there making it, or the facilities team. We have a team of people who show up all week long and just fix everything that breaks, and a lot of stuff breaks. You're a very aggressive group of people. And so, if you think about all of that, that's just in the church, and that's not the whole picture here. Just being in the church doesn't cure isolation. But that's where it starts for us, is loving and serving in the church. And I do hope you'll go to eastern.life or hit that QR code in front of you, and you'll just sign up for a conversation about being connected in a greater way, about being part of something in a greater way. Now, the story goes on. So our gifts are meant to be shared in community. By the way, if that preschool pitch totally got your heart and I misunderstood, come see me. We like, you're needed in the preschool, okay? So we continue on. Back to the ordinary story. Paul goes. Each Sabbath, we found Paul at the synagogue Luke is the author of this. We won't go into details of that right now, but Luke says, each Sabbath, we found Paul at the synagogue trying to convince the Jews and the Greeks alike. And then after Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul spent all his time preaching the word. He testified to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. Again, pretty ordinary. Paul's making tents, living with Priscilla and Aquila. A couple other friends come down. They're in community. And Paul's doing one of his gifts that he's made for, which is sharing verbally about the hope of Christ. That's what he does his whole life. Now, Paul has some other exciting things happen in his life. He's arrested. He's shipwrecked. He's starved. He's whipped. He's imprisoned. He's bit by a snake. He's imprisoned again. And he's put to death in Rome. That part of the story is a little harder for us to connect with. That's good. I'm glad that's not our story arc right now. But this is just Paul living. This is his day-to-day life a couple thousand years ago. And it continues, and it says, but when they opposed, so he's telling Jewish communities about Jesus, when they opposed and insulted him, Paul shook the dust from his clothes and said, your blood is upon your own heads. I'm innocent. From now on, I will go preach to the Gentiles. I think this is a really big distinction about day-to-day living. Now, for those of us that don't use a lot of classic language in our day-to-day life, this is not as aggressively dramatic as it sounds. Your blood is upon your own heads was like a colloquialism that meant you're responsible. I tried, you're responsible. Okay, so Paul just looks at his crowd and goes, look, I tried. You guys you're clearly, you're opposing me, you're insulting me, you're responsible. I'm going to head outside of my inner community to other people. And we find this unfold. We're made to share our gifts both within and beyond our personal community. I think this is so important. I mean, my heart is for the local church, but not because of the local church. It's for their local church because of the city, because of the neighborhood, because of Treasure Valley. It's that a healthy, functioning church would be a picture of who Jesus is, and not just on an uplift day, where this upcoming Saturday we get to go out, and if you're feeling isolated, let me give you a really practical step. Just sign up to do something and see what happens. I know that step can be too big. But if you can take that step, and you show up on Saturday, you rake some leaves, you visit with some folks in a memory care facility, you take care of one of our other nonprofits, you jump in, you meet a few names, and you imagine maybe I don't need to be or feel as alone as I am. Maybe I feel like I'm just a foot, but the foot matters in the body. We're made to share our gifts within and beyond, and by beyond, not just within the church and within Uplift, but where you're going to go to work tomorrow, where you're going to go to school tomorrow, where you're going to be tomorrow if you're retired and trying to map out your days, where if you're looking for work right now, that beyond is so important, because the Christian life is not supposed to start and stop within a Sunday block or a life group block or a service block. It's the all of your life, and that's what we see with Paul. He's a tent maker. So he's sharing rent, making tents, telling people about Jesus. Things don't go so well there, so he's like, okay, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to tell other people about Jesus. And let's see what happens. Then he left and he went to the home of Titus Justus, a Gentile who worshiped God and lived next door to the synagogue. And then Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, and everyone in his household believed in the Lord. Many others in Corinth also heard Paul, and they became believers and were baptized. And there's this, I guess it's a bit of a dramatic turn, but the outcome of sharing your gifts in community and the outcome of sharing your gifts both within and beyond your community. So if Paul wasn't willing to share his gifts beyond his community, he wouldn't have been willing to stay in a house of a Gentile next to the synagogue. That was totally out of bounds. It's like against ethnic rules. But he was willing to do that. And what we find is there's more peace and there's the expansion of hope. And that, I can get out of bed for that. Can there be more peace and can hope expand? If I can be part of those two things, then yes, sign me up. But it doesn't have to be wildly dramatic. It can just be where we live in our day-to-day lives. But here's what's really key, is we talked about this, though. It's not just like, all right, everybody, all right, people, go be a body and do something. Friends, there's an invitation to trust Jesus, to be the foundation of your life. Jesus, one of his most pointed stories to me is when he's looking at people and he says, look, those who follow me, they're like people who build their houses on a firm foundation. When the wind comes and when the rain comes, the wind and rain, that's just relationships, disease, economy, global events, news feeds. When life happens, those that build their house on a solid foundation, they won't fall to the ground. But those who build their houses on a foundation that's not solid, the whole thing will crash down. What's always struck me about that is no one would have heard that story and thought the only victim would be the person in the house. They would have thought it would be all the people connected to that house. The crashing down would have affected so many people. And so through the death, through his life, the death and the resurrection of Jesus, the forgiveness of sins, he says we receive the Holy Spirit, which becomes the power that drives the capacity and the potential and the purpose, no matter what you're doing on your day-to-day job. Most of us aren't tent makers, but I don't think we would love that job 2,000 years ago. That's what Paul was doing, all right? So 3 practical things I want to give you to kind of wrap this up. Ways to think about living your life this week. You're going to be like, yay, thanks for stating the obvious and taking my time to do that. But I want to. I just want to point out to you, the first is this. We see that when you realize you're a gift with gifts to share, and you see that it can happen in this ordinary space, and you realize that you're part of a body where no one part has greater value than the other, then live a life that's practical. Be a tent maker. We grow our gifts when we work with others, and you can do it everywhere. I do appreciate, like, when I found out Emily was sharing, I'm like, what are you going to say about coffee? She's like, I don't even care about coffee. She goes, but I love people. Just look for a place. Look for a place. For those of you that like 20-year-old animated films, watch Robots. The tagline of Robots is this: see a need and fill it. And yes, I'm pumping up a kids show right now. See a need and fill it. Live a life that's practical. Walk into your life, your workspace, your sports team. Walk into the communities you're part of. Walk into your home or your neighborhood and go, what can I practically do to bring value, to share my gifts, to bring purpose to this place? We should use our gifts in a way that's practical. I think we get stuck when we're like, okay, but these gifts, it's like trying to, read a dream catcher. I just figure it out, and then maybe I'll know my purpose. I'm like, good luck. I haven't been able to figure that out. Just consider that your day-to-day life has incredible purpose, but it's the power that you need to make it all work. The next thing is this: live a life that's generous. Don't go to money right away. You all know somebody that you go, they're the most generous person I know, and you're not thinking about money. You're thinking about their emotional space for you, the time they have, how they always jump to a need practically. They're just there. We should use our gifts to serve those, both within and beyond our community, and it should be marked by generosity. Generosity. I'm going to give you a closing question to really think about that. And then the last is this: live a life that's expectant. And this is a tough one, because the more years you get, the more you realize the danger in expecting is all the disappointment that comes on the other side of it. But Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, the same place that was opposing Paul and insulting him, Crispus became a follower of Jesus, and everyone in his household believed and was baptized, and many people in Corinth became followers of Jesus, and the church there was formed. That's the church that Paul wrote the letter to, the letter about how you should be one body. And so I want to give you a way to reflect on these 3 things as we close and sing a closing song. Where is God inviting you to be? And if you're at a space, because I know some of you might be where you're like, I'm not in that conversation with God right now, then just lean into this. Just ask God, just try to talk to God for a minute here. Just say, God, I don't know if you know me and I don't know if I know you, but I want to talk about where could I be more? Where could I fight isolation with? Where could I be part of reducing the epidemic of loneliness? And it can be done. It can be done. Person by person, minute by minute, day by day. That God, where are you inviting me to be practical in how you see your gifts? Despiritualize, demystify. Generous with your gifts, your schedule, your resources, or expectant despite your disappointments. The world needs communities that are full of expectation. I'll give you a minute to think through those, and then we'll sing together to close.
So you catch me when I fall, right? And you hear me when I call crying. And you fix me when I'm broke, right? And that's all I need to know. So the storm is gonna break, right? And the sun is gonna start shining. And everything is gonna go right. And that's all I need to know. What if you know something I don't? What if you will something I won't? If you don't give me what I want, but you give me what I need, is that enough to believe, 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 believe in your love? Will I still believe, 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 believe in your love? So nothing's ever going wrong, right? And every day I'm gonna be smiling. Turn my water into good wine and let the good times roll. But what if you know something I don't? What if you will something I won't? If you don't give me what I